accept your challenge.
Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City, and now the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Can't complain. It's Friday. I'm ready for the weekend. It's going to be a good weekend. How about you? What are you up to?
Good. Well, you know, the usual.
The usual.
Mostly things I can't tell you.
And,
Some
that's
things
true.
I can tell you.
That's true. Hey, that's interesting. That's a good. That's actually a good bridge. Tell me, because I think we can probably talk about it now, right? We're like 2 weeks away, right? Tell me about what we are going to be doing in 2 weeks.
We will be going to WonderCon, which I believe is our first comic convention in just about 2 years, maybe even more than 2 years, because we didn't go in 2020, right?
It was canceled in 2020,
yeah.
And it would have been right around now, and we didn't go. So yeah, it's been 2 years since we've been to a comic convention.
And there have been some soft launches of some conventions and some really lovely invitations, but up till now, we really haven't felt that it's been safe enough for us to be there. So this feels like the right time. We've submitted for a panel, and I think we're allowed to announce that our Arkham Sessions panel will be a part of the show and is scheduled for Saturday at 4:30.
Yeah, Saturday, that's April 2nd at 4:30, right?
Yes.
In room 300D, if I remember correctly.
Wow, you have a really good memory because I did not remember that detail.
I just remember it was like an even, it seemed like a high even number. I think it's 300D.
I got super scared just now because we have 2 cats, and in the corner of my eye, I saw a third cat, and we do not have 3 cats.
But we do have a mirror, though.
But no, we have a pair of boots that looks...
Oh, that looks like a cat.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I got a little distracted.
Okay, so we've got a panel in room 300D at 4:30 p.m. on Saturday, April 2nd at the Anaheim Convention Center for WonderCon. Why don't you tell the good folks what we're going to be discussing on said panel?
I'm so excited to be joined by a friend, colleague, and expert, Batman expert.
Yeah, friend of the show. We've had her on before.
Yes. So London Jackson from The History of the Batman will be joining us. A new friend and colleague, Hector Navarro, who folks probably know from DC Daily. He's going to be joining us. It's going to be like a smash up or a mashup of Batman experts, and we're really going to focus on the film, The Batman by Matt Reeves.
So we finally get to talk about The Batman, which you have been dying to talk about with anyone and everyone who will listen. In fact, we're going to go and see it again within the next few days just to, for quote unquote, research. And really just to enjoy the movie again. We should ask our listeners, though, since we're going ahead and telling you about this panel, if you have any questions you want us to address, any sort of topics of conversation specifically regarding Matt Reeves' movie, The Batman, starring Robert Pattinson and Zoe Kravitz, Paul Dano, Jeffrey Wright.
Did you see that Paul Dano is now writing a comic about the origins of this Riddler?
I did not see that.
It's going to be on one of the Black Label.
Oh.
It's going to be in the Black Label.
Here for it.
Series in DC.
It's interesting because we kind of got the origins to some degree. At least as far as we got the origins to Batman, in that as a child he was troubled and then as an adult came back and was suddenly wearing a mask. But
that's really it.
That's all you need.
That's usually the path.
That is the origin story of all heroes and villains in the DC universe. This is an episode that we have been excited to do for a while. In fact, I will fill in the listeners for the last 4 or 5 episodes, I think. right before we watched whatever movie we needed to watch, you would then ask me, is this Black Panther? Is this Black Panther? Are we doing Black Panther next? How about next? Well, now we just did Black Panther. We're doing Black Panther. We just watched it, and now we're going to talk about Black Panther. So what is it about this movie that excited you so that you basically thought Black Panther began phase 3 of the MCU?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a bit of an escape from the MCU's traditional favoring and spotlighting of the Tony Starks and the Captain America type characters. Now, we've seen Black Panther at least once. I believe we saw him in Civil War.
Correct.
So,
he was a big part of Civil War.
Yeah, so he's already been introduced, but you named it too. There's a bit of a formula with some of the films up till now. And for me, this is a bit of a deviation from that formula.
To some degree.
I mean, there is a villain.
I'm glad that you brought this up, actually, because I wanted to discuss this. The fact that, as we've noted with the MCU, typically it's someone who has something or has created something who then has a rival who is of equal intelligence or monetary value or strength, who then also wants that thing, and they ended up making their own version of that thing, and then they end up trying to take over the world with it, usually for monetary gain or some sort of whatever. This movie does not escape that part of the formula.
I actually think it does a little bit.
Well, but let me finish. So this movie still has that same thing. It still has the guy who has a thing, a power, a position, a role that another person wants. That person then comes and takes it from him.
And he becomes the villain.
Sure. But in this particular case, and this is where I give Ryan Coogler, the filmmaker, co-writer, all the praise in the world. He has turned that formula on its ear, and he has actually given the villain, if you even want to call him that, a genuine argument. Mm-hmm. Like, this is why I should have your power. This is why I should have your super suit or your weapon or your whatever.
In this case, vibranium.
Correct. Yeah. This is why I deserve to have these things. And you know what? He's got a legit argument.
This is the first time it's possibly justifiable.
Yeah.
If not relatable. There's something about the power dynamic that makes us root for Killmonger.
Yeah, and in this particular case, what ultimately ends up at the end is Killmonger, while he doesn't necessarily succeed in his by any means necessary, level of commitment, he does succeed. His mission is ultimately successful by way of T'Challa.
He completely dismantles the system of Wakanda, the royal and political system that Wakanda has upheld for so many years, and we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. I think there's a way here in which the previous formulas have been subverted. This is, in my mind, a much more dynamic way to use that formula.
Yep.
And I'd say moving forward, I could be wrong, and I might regret saying this, but this to me is a turning point, because we'll have many characters coming into our lives in the next handful of Marvel films that will occupy this gray area, somewhat of an anti-hero or villain, making poor choices, being, on the fringes, not exactly playing along, but have some part of their psychology that could make sense to us.
Oh, I see. You're talking about Thanos now.
I'm talking about multiple characters we may encounter. And we've had a little bit of this before with Cybertron. Ultron. We've had it with Ultron.
Unicron? Okay.
We've had it with Ultron.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a turning point. Oh, and Bucky, that's the other character I was thinking. Bucky, again, we won't go through the history of some of these characters, but there have been some complicated things and complicated relationships. And I think this is what Marvel does well. And we're going to see some of that upcoming in the films. We've got to really pay attention to Black Panther and not get too far from the assignment here, because this film, this isn't even hypothetical. This film has been discussed in college courses. It's been the topic of university lectures. I've done panels with colleagues far more expert than myself in some of these subjects. Mm-hmm. This film has truly, from visual effects to fashion to costume design to politics to psychology, this film really has given us a lot to talk about in multiple fields and multiple disciplines. It is such a gift. And I think really we could have a series on this, and I wish we could, but today we're really just going to focus on where the lane where we really belong, which is the psychology of the characters.
So we're not going to talk about the special effects, the visual effects. We're not going to.
I mean, and we should talk a little bit about the aspects of resource hoarding and gatekeeping, and this important parallel between the individual relationships and the global dynamic, or the global model that we have of people who have an amazing resource and do not get involved in any international global engagements or share that resource, up until the end of the movie. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a parallel with the relationships too. It's fair to say that Killmonger, and we'll get into this more, but Killmonger was deprived of
his heritage.
Yeah, I love that you said heritage. He was deprived of the value setting, the orientation of family, the rich relationships that actually he would have gotten either in Oakland or in Wakanda. Mm-hmm. But because his family was taken away from him, he was almost like it was an exile. Mm-hmm. He was it's like as if he's a refugee without a home, and without family, and without a pathway.
We don't really know much about his mother. Mm-mm. We know that in the beginning of the movie, we open with, surprisingly, not T'Challa asking T'Chaka about Wakanda. We actually hear a small child asking for what's essentially a bedtime story, a fantasy story about this fantasy land, Wakanda. And the little boy's father is recounting the history of Wakanda and how it was struck by a meteorite. That meteorite turned out to be vibranium, the most powerful element known to man. And that vibranium created a rich environment. That vibranium is good for anything and everything you could possibly want it to be good for. And Wakanda bubbled themselves off from the rest of the world. They didn't give any of this technology away or any of this resource. And while world wars and all this other stuff was happening around them, they stayed neutral, always with an eye on what was going on, but never getting involved. And then we learned that little boy was not T'Challa talking to T'Chaka. That little boy was the boy who would grow up to be Killmonger, talking to his father, who was a member of the royal family, who was T'Chaka's brother. And T'Chaka had turned his back on Wakanda to some degree. He was sent out sort of as a spy. They refer to them all as spies, right? Wakanda is sending out representatives from their country to countries and nations all over the world. And the idea is that they are always keeping an eye on what is happening. They're always reporting back to Wakanda the state of the world. And this character was one of those spies, but he had gotten involved in politics. Really, he began to see how, especially the African Americans in his region in Oakland, were being mistreated and held down, and he decided to rise up, and he decided to steal vibranium and some of the technology, the weaponry. And his idea was he was basically going to disperse it amongst the African American community, and that the African American community was going to be able to rise up for the first time in the history of their existence since coming to the United States, since being brought to the United States in chains. And it didn't just stop here. Those spies essentially were potentially going to do the exact same thing all around the world. And once T'Chaka found out, he ultimately killed his own brother, leaving this young boy, who would grow up to be Killmonger, as ostensibly an orphan, I would imagine. I mean, Eric, we learned that Eric was born to his father and a woman from the outside that his father had fallen in love with. Mm-hmm. But we never see her, so we don't know really what her deal is. And I don't remember, I could be wrong, I don't remember Eric ever saying anything about her over the course of the movie.
There's a hint that it's not that she's not absent, right, but that she doesn't have an impact.
Or maybe she wasn't, maybe she was never there when he was a kid. Like maybe the moment that we see when he's playing basketball outside with his friends, like maybe T'Chaka literally did leave him an orphan. We just don't know that part. Yeah, that part isn't really explained.
It's not clear. But what is clear is that he identifies as African American, and it's likely that his mother was African American. Mm-hmm. And there's this a mixedness. There's a hybridity about his identity. He knows that his father comes from this other country, this other region with this rich culture. He also was born and raised in the U.S. And adopted specifically Oakland culture. Mm-hmm. And Ryan Coogler talks about the importance of history there. And what I learned is that particularly in the 60s and 70s and during the rise and aftermath of the Black Panther Party, mm-hmm, that African Americans in Oakland in particular embraced a community of sharing and resource, the division and sharing of resources, mm-hmm, to the degree that it's likely Eric grew up to some degree understanding that is what family is, that he felt what was a part of him, or what was an important part of his value system, is how the Black community in Oakland treated each other. Yeah, this is again, it means the distribution of goods and services. It means supporting family to family. Mm-hmm. In case of the Black Panther Party in particular, it was to be armed, like to have weapons and to have those, I guess I'd call it like a more militant type of resource, a way to defend yourself, a way to protect one another, a way to call yourself and identify as a particular group, a particular part of society. And you can imagine that when he discovers the concept of vibranium, both the metal vibranium and then the plant that offers this amazing power, that's how he sees it. And you are to share that with your community.
Well, the fantasy that he thought he'd been growing up with
Right.
This bedtime story turns out to be true. Turns out that there is magic in the world. Turns out that there is power in the world. And it turns out that the people that he feels, because of his environment where he grew up, the people he feels should be sharing this stuff are actually holding it back. And they are not sharing, even to the other people originally from the African continent. They are not sharing it with their own people. They are not helping their own people.
And that's the discomfort that I think a lot of us realize in watching, learning, I guess, about Wakanda.
Yeah.
Wakanda is this isolated utopia. The combination of culture, technology, and environmental preservation, it's like no other place, and it's preserved in this way, in a way that is a glamorization, right? Or some kind of it's that, like you said, fairy tale that actually resonates for me, because in reality, in the world we actually live in, a place like Wakanda should make us uncomfortable. That elitism, that the fact that they live comfortably and hoard and hold this power in this resource-rich bubble under a monarchy where the people rely on one person to make decisions about that resource.
One person given special powers through a supernatural means.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is Wakanda basically starts out the movie as what would be a sort of a nationalist state in some degree, where it's all about Wakanda. It's all about, even their spies out in the world are really only there to make sure that other people don't find out about Wakanda and about the strength of Wakanda. And Wakanda is represented because, T'Chaka was there as one of the countries who signed the why can I not say it this time? The Sokovian Accord.
Sokovia?
Thank you. Why could I not
I'm just
get it?
watch you struggle.
I know, I couldn't get it. All right, the Sokovian Accords. His father was there. That's when T'Chaka was killed, right? So the community knows Wakanda exists. The only thing is they assume that Wakanda is a third world backwoods jungle tribe who fights with sticks and rocks. Like they have no concept of what Wakanda is. And it's because no one is allowed into Wakanda. Like no outsiders are allowed in. This is a very nationalist point of view, right? This idea that everything is for us. We're really only looking out for us. For some people, they might remember America First as a, we're only looking out for us and our own. We are not in any way interested in other countries or nations or cities in other parts of the world if it doesn't affect us. Through one character in one very quick moment, Wakabi comes right out and says, well, maybe we should change it. Maybe we should just go and take we should just go invade. Like basically we should become like a fascist society where we're going to free all of the black people of the world, and we are going to turn the world on its ear. Suddenly Wakanda will become the ruling nation of the entire world. We're going to now instill all of our beliefs and all of our systems on the rest of the world. And who's going to stop us? Because no one else has access to vibranium. Right. No one else can do the things we can do. And T'Challa is very quick to say, no, that's not how we handle things. But it's clear that Wakabi really wants to go out and sort of hand the world its ass, right? Like he wants, when Killmonger comes in with this idea, it's very easy to pull Wakabi in on his side.
Yeah, he's able to actually appeal to many of the members of the Wakandan nation.
Yeah.
Because ostensibly they, again, don't necessarily have individual participation in their politics and in their and especially in any global involvements, and nothing regarding their resource. So it may be a change that they are, willing to accept. I did have I definitely want to get to that. That moment where Killmonger comes into the throne room and begins interacting with some of the royal family, and he's like, his perspective is one that really impacted me. But I just want to pause and ask you something we skipped over a little bit. He, to our knowledge, lost his father. He discovered his father's body. Like, he goes back, he's outside playing. He notices something strange in the sky. He comes back to his apartment. This, high rise, really dense part of the city in Oakland, finds his father murdered.
It's very important too, just because I think we'll touch on it at the end.
Yeah.
It's very important to notice what he saw in the sky. It was a night sky, very cloudy. All he saw were mysterious, scary lights, engine lights.
Sure.
Like this is a very terrifying sort of thing, especially if you don't know what it is, or it's at least wonder inducing. But then there is a moment later, just moments later, when he goes upstairs and realizes his father's dead, that this becomes a terrifying association. This is important because later Ryan Coogler shows us the antithesis of that. He wraps that up in a nice bow.
Okay. Yes, we need to return to that.
Yeah.
So the question for you, so I'm naming this incredibly, it's a critical and life-changing trauma. It's multiple things. Think about Batman, right? A trauma we've talked about multiple times. It's the sudden loss of a caregiver, somebody that you look up to, who mentors you, who you're close with. And it's the discovery of the body. So there's some element of that's horrific. And then there's the meaning of this, right? The helplessness around this. What could I have done? How did this happen? What led to this? So the aftermath is what I wanted to talk to you about. So little Eric, what is he, maybe like 10? He's pretty young.
Yeah, he's a young kid. I'd put him somewhere in that like 12. He doesn't seem quite, he seems a little older than.
So he's like maybe 12.
Preteen, 12-ish.
He has the history, the verbal stories and histories that his father shared about Wakanda. He has the artifacts, some of the books and some of the written materials that his father has kept records in. So he has some familiarity with Wakanda. And then I think what I want to ask you about is, I understand that he goes through, in this first phase, or I want to say like first period of his trauma, it's a time of loss and grief and sadness over the missing of his father. But then something really kind of changes for him. He goes out and he becomes like a special ops guy. Talk to me about that. I think that's where I want to better understand, is this somebody who is looking for purpose? Is this somebody who's becoming a person who then is going to fundamentally do right by his father? How do you kind of look at his, I want to call it radicalization.
Well, yes. I do think it's radicalization. I think you could ultimately, as in the same way that you could describe Professor X and Magneto as Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, I think you could kind of do the same thing here with T'Challa and Killmonger. Killmonger is the Malcolm X character by any means necessary. He is going to live by his father's code. He is going to, especially now, he is going to become Bruce Wayne, right? He is going to go learn how to kill, how to fight, how to win, how to survive. He is going to become terrifying. So the moment he comes face to face with a Wakandan, he can take care of himself. And that's exactly what he does, right? He shows up and he has sort of ceremonial scarring all over his torso and back. Mm-hmm. And each one represents a different person he's killed. He's become someone who has no problem taking a life because it will help him further his cause. And he is willing to not only kill for the cause, he's willing to die for the cause. And I think everything that he did leading up to this moment was just him preparing for this moment. The same way Bruce Wayne went through years and years of turmoil and pain and suffering just to scar up his body and prepare for his fight in Gotham City. That is exactly what Killmonger is doing in this film. And Killmonger knows his birthright. He knows that as royalty, he is allowed to challenge T'Challa for the throne. Does so. And in a moment of hubris, T'Challa agrees to the challenge, because what could this outsider possibly do? Plus, T'Challa is also got information that others in the room don't necessarily have. They don't know that T'Chaka killed his brother. They do not know that this child is the child of this character. And he is doing everything he can to help his ancestors keep this covered up.
Well, so there's a lot happening there with, oh my gosh, where do I start? So like the secrecy of this, a family member we don't claim, we have pushed him out. Yeah, we've exiled him. We refuse to acknowledge him. The abandonment of that is tremendous.
And that's ultimately what T'Challa says at the end when he,
Sure. But what I want to acknowledge first is that Killmonger carries that experience with him.
Yes.
He's going about it in an extreme way with his radicalization and his violence. But I think you're right that he's concentrated on a mission. He's not a reckless person just kind of out there.
No.
You made a comparison to Batman. There's a similar sort of focus on his mission.
Yeah.
And yet
this is what happens if Batman became a bad guy. Yeah.
And then what's heartbreaking, and I think it'd be great if you could play some of the interaction. What's heartbreaking is that he comes to the family and while he's certainly guarded and resentful, he's in pain. I mean, the things that he's sharing, at least as we go through that scene, is I'm family. I belong to you.
Yeah.
And you've spent the entirety of your history ensuring that people like me are disadvantaged. You're ensuring that people like me are under-resourced and underserved. And the traumas I've had are in part because you can't do what the folks in Oakland have been doing for me, at least in my youth, which is we share, we connect, we divide resources. So I wonder if you can play some of that dialogue where he's confronting his auntie and his cousins and all his people.
And Uncle James. I've got the audio right here. So let's take a listen.
Y'all sitting up here comfortable. Must feel good. It's about 2 billion people all over the world that looks like us, but their lives are a lot harder. Wakanda has the tools to liberate them all.
And what tools are those?
Vibranium. Your weapons.
Our weapons will not be used to wage war on the world. It is not our way to be judge, jury, and executioner for people who are not our own.
Not your own. But didn't life start right here on this continent? So ain't all people your people?
I am not king of all people. I am king of Wakanda.
And while this is a dynamic that doesn't exist, I think a lot of people felt for him. You know, like he's supposed to be the villain, but I think that moment allowed some of us to stand. Like, wait a minute. I'm reminded that after this movie came out, a lot of my colleagues, I worked in foster care and child welfare work for about 6 years. A lot of my colleagues texted me and connected with me, messaged me and just basically said, like, this is a tragic story about this kid who got kind of lost in the system. And there's a lot of parallels there with the importance of belonging to a family. It doesn't have to be the family that's a blood relative. In this case, it is, but the importance of bringing in a child who is a member of your extended family, being able, now he's an adult now, but it still, I think, causes us to feel hurt, you know, some level of empathy for him.
Yeah. And I think that's ultimately too why T'Challa, I said a minute ago that T'Challa takes the challenge because of hubris and because he felt like there was nothing that an outsider could have done to beat him. But let's also be honest, this is also a moment where T'Challa is struggling internally with sort of reconciling this fact that this is a cousin of his, and that this cousin does have a claim to the throne, and T'Challa is a man of tradition and ceremony. And it's in this moment, while his mother is willing to write this kid off, regardless of who he is, T'Challa does stand up in that moment, and he does say, "No, you have claim to this. Come take it." Now, the rest of it is, I think, where the hubris comes in. He just doesn't fully give this kid the respect that he deserves.
We'll talk about that too. So, you know, they're cousins who never knew each other.
Why am I talking about that specifically? You know, like,
I think
I'm sure I have cousins I've never known.
I mean, I think, yeah, not that part specifically, but the idea that this reunion isn't one of, you know, love and compassion, it complicates things, you know, like I think for both of them to realize each other means that they have to reckon with the
differences between realness. The two. I mean, the truth is T'Challa is king, right? He's king of an entire country. He is rich. He is insanely intelligent. He has all the technology at his fingertips that could change the world for both good and bad. And then you've got this kid who's basically just been raised on being beaten down and then beating the people down who have tried to beat him down. It's kill or be killed in his world. And suddenly he comes into this lavish environment where everyone has everything they've ever wanted and they do nothing to help others. As long as no one does anything to hurt them, they stay out of it. And meanwhile, all he's ever seen is pain being inflicted upon people in general, but specifically his people. And he makes that comment about, you know, isn't this where civilization started? Aren't we all related? You know, why are you not helping everyone with what you have? And by the way, this is what's interesting too about Wakanda. Like, this is the antithesis of what exists in the real world, at least as far as we know. For all we know, there is a Wakanda out there that is technologically advanced. But usually when you think of a country that has bubbled itself off from the rest of the world, those are the ones that are still living in the jungles. They're still living, you know, there's all these myths around them? Are they cannibals? Do they have weird ceremonies? Do they pray to certain gods for rain? And do they do this and that? And meanwhile, you've got Wakanda, who has not allowed Western technology or civilization to affect it, and instead has actually surpassed by eons the world around it. Right? There has been no cultural exchange. There has been no technological exchange. They just have everything they need, and they are light years beyond what the world around them has developed. Primarily, I mean, let's be honest. Yes, the ore of vibranium is incredibly important to all of this, but they still have to have the technical know-how.
Right.
Shuri still has to be able to take this ore and create this technology from it. So their intelligence and their wealth so far surpasses what anyone could possibly imagine in the rest of the world. Now imagine that you're an angry kid from Oakland coming into this environment. You want to burn it to the ground. You want to burn it to the ground. You want to take it over, and you want to use the resources to arm your brethren, the people. And you don't necessarily consider Wakanda your brethren. You're talking about the people who have struggled with you, who have fought with you, and you are going to win by any means necessary. And that means destroying the tradition of Wakanda, destroying the plants that help. He ensures that there will never be another king of Wakanda by destroying all the plant they have there, which helps give the power of the Black Panther. And then he basically tells his army, okay, let's go. Let's take all this gear. Let's take all this weaponry. Let's take all this technology. Let's take all of this vibranium, and let's get out there and hand it off in the same way the Black Panthers would, in the same way that the people in Oakland would. That's what I think is so dynamic about not just that scene, but just these two characters. This kid who's only known this life, and then this kid who's only known this other life coming into it and raising it.
Yeah, and I'd say there's the important backdrop of our real history, the colonization and slavery,
100%,
and atrocities that have happened over the course of not only the time of Killmonger's ancestors, but during his own lifetime.
Hundreds, thousands of years. How
those traumas then have this cascading ripple effect that impact his life. And I think what I want to ask you to play actually is this description by Ryan Coogler around those two connected identities, the Wakandan, i.e. African character, and Killmonger, the African-American man who both of them see these connections, but also see this great divide and difference between them. And I think he articulates this better than I can.
You're talking about the bonus feature.
With some lived experience. Yeah, if you can kind of play that description from the panel discussion he did.
Absolutely. Here we go.
First time I picked up a Black Panther comic book, I asked the dude, I said, man, and the comic book show, I'm like, hey, man, show me if there's any characters in here that got black people, like the book's about them. But he's like, yeah, I got Black Panther. And I'm like, and I see it, I'm like, man, this is dope. Like, tell me about him. He's just African king and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, man, that's not me. I couldn't relate to that. If like it was for me, Killmonger, being from Harlem and like maroon from there, he was a little closer of a way in, you know what I'm saying? Like from my perspective. This is before I traveled to the continent. This is before I really saw, oh yeah, I got as much ownership over T'Challa as anybody, you know what I'm saying? And I actually own both of them, you know what I'm saying? And I got both these characters living inside of me, you know what I'm saying? Like living inside. I think T'Challa and Killmonger live inside of every African American.
T'Challa and him end up at the same place kind of by the end, but for different one out of
by
empathy.
different paths.
By different paths.
Yeah.
So the idea that the idea that our hero gets affected by our villain is something that was important to try to achieve, and I think that helps with the kind of connection that people have to him.
Wow. Yeah. So let's talk about T'Challa. This kid who was raised this way, who was raised through tradition, who was raised by ancestors who did look the other way, who refused to help, while colonizers were coming in and taking the people of their continent, they did nothing. T'Challa basically figures this out, and it really hits him. I want to know, from your perspective as a psychologist, talk about that transition. Like, what suddenly he does become someone who becomes a bit more of a globalist, right? At the end, he even announces to the world, we're here. Not only are we here, we're now going to be seen, and we are offering you our technology. We are offering you our resources. And jokingly, a white dude from some European country is like, well, with all due respect, what could you possibly offer us? And of course, we know what he can offer them. But talk about that change in your own thinking and what that does to you.
I think that it's important that he had some original frameworks for that. This isn't the first time he's considering that Wakanda has the ability to help others. Mm-hmm. This has come up for him before. Mm-hmm. But what changes him, what seems to spark this transformation, is the time spent with Eric. And it could be, it's similar to what Ryan Coogler was describing, this idea that, and they didn't spend a lot of time together. And by the way, they fought each other for a long
majority
scene.
Of the time.
Yeah. like sparring in the deep vibranium caves of the Wakandan forest. But
the train lines.
Yeah. Not my favorite part of the movie. It just looks weirdly animated, but
it's pretty bad.
Aside from that, he spends some time with him, and there is some dialogue that's important. And the reality is that fundamentally he acknowledges he isn't too different than Eric, that there's this common ground there. And that, I think, is what sparks the transformation. It's something that all of us have the capacity to do. It's kind of like, walk in my shoes for a little bit. Mm-hmm. We can't really do that. We can't really exercise empathy until we're able to allow ourselves to be attuned to someone else's pain. Being attuned to someone else's pain actually requires us to pull from our own pain. And there's something within T'Challa. It could be the death of his father. It could be the fact that his father was attacked and, essentially died in as a part of political involvement, that he realized, this huge loss impacted him. But it's that ability to see the world through someone else's eyes. They're cousins. Mm-hmm. What difference, that could have been him. He could have had that experience. And the aspects of growing up in Oakland versus growing up in Wakanda struck him. I think that really resonated for him. And at the very, very end of the film, and I think you said that you wanted to discuss this a little bit, Killmonger's injured, and T'Challa tells him that there might be a chance for him to be healed, that he doesn't have to die here.
Yeah. Does he say, maybe we can still save you?
Yeah.
Which could also be figurative. Like, this could also be... Sure. And then Killmonger straight up says, why? So that I can be locked up in chains, like, basically like a slave, like a prisoner? Mm-hmm. And says, no, just bury me out in the ocean like my ancestors that jumped off the slave ships, because they would rather die than, they'd rather drown than than be slaves.
Than live in oppression.
Right.
Yeah. It's a very direct statement. It's not subtle. And I think that T'Challa gains from that time he spends with Killmonger, the essence of, yes, they're related, but also they could have had, that could have been him. Mm-hmm. He could have had that experience. Mm-hmm. And moreover, I think that what he realizes is that there is some truth to what Killmonger's saying.
Yes. He realizes that there's no reason why they should have sat back and watched the world burn when they could have helped it. And that doesn't mean taking the world over, right? That doesn't mean I'm now going to be king of all the world, but it means helping when you have the ability to help, whether that's through money or whether that's through strength. Help. There's no reason not to. And he finally comes to that realization and has the benefit of being able to confront his ancestors with that new insight.
Yeah. One of my favorite scenes is when T'Challa
goes back and sees him the second time.
He essentially dies, and he receives his family, brings him the very last of the vibranium plant, and he goes into that kind of middle world where he can communicate with lost, passed on relatives. And there's his father who says, you're ready to move into the afterlife. Like you're done with your time on Earth. And T'Challa refuses to step into that next journey. He refuses to stop living because he feels that there's something really important that he could do. But I also want you to play
I think I know exactly what you want me to play.
To play the plea, or it's I think a moment of understanding for Killmonger. And this, I think, is for me really the center, the core of this film's impact. It's for me just the main story, which is that this young child had the opportunity of belonging in community, and he was abandoned, and people willingly did this, and they have to come to terms with that. It's addressing to the elder, why did you close your door? You're already, you are the gatekeeper, and here you are doing it to one of your own.
Yeah, I've got it right here. Let's take a listen.
Why didn't you bring the boy home? Why, Baba? He was the truth I chose to omit. You were wrong to abandon him. I chose my people. I chose Wakanda. Our future depended on... You are wrong! All of you are wrong! To turn your backs on the rest of the world! We let the fear of our discovery stop us from doing what is right. No more. I cannot stay here with you. I cannot rest where he sits on the throne. He is a monster of our own making.
Powerful moment. Great moment in the movie.
And so at the end of the movie, is this where you find the beginning and the end kind of, are those bookends you talked about? Is that the last scene there?
No, the last scene is literally the last scene of the movie, where the terrifying ship that is hovering over in the night sky with a cloudy, you can't see it clearly. It's pitch black, hovering over that building that he grew up in. Then you fast forward to now. Daylight, no clouds in the sky. And suddenly he announces to Cherie that he has bought 3 adjacent buildings, and they are going to turn it into a cultural center where it's basically going to be a cultural exchange center. And he makes the same vehicle completely visible, widely visible to these same aged children. And now it instills a sense of wonder and smiles instead of confusion and fear and then anger. And he lands it right there, and Cherie walks over to them and begins talking to them about it and begins educating them on the technology. And and another young boy comes up to T'Challa and asks him who he is. None of this happened in that first scene in the movie, and it's terrifying in that first moment. The moment Wakanda comes to this building for the first time is terrifying. The moment Wakanda comes to the building the second time, it is without curtains. It is daylight. It is right there in your face. And it is, you ask me a question, I will give you the answer. Let us embrace all of you.
Yeah. It represents the liberation movement that Killmonger has been literally fighting his way to have, right?
Yeah, this is, and here's the beauty of it. This is why it's poetic to me. It's not just the liberation of the people who aren't Wakanda, it's the liberation of Wakanda as well. Mm-hmm. It is the opening up of Wakanda. Now suddenly these people are not stuck in this place only caring about themselves. They are now learning what it is like to be a part of the world around them and to truly be a part of the world around them, not just a secret that no one knows about. And so you really get to see in this one film this beautiful arc, not just for T'Challa, but for the whole country. This is what it was. This is what it is now. And I like the symmetry of it.
Well, I like the concept or the conceit that change is possible.
Yeah.
That it pushes back against the traditionalism and the insistence that you can't impact a system, or that dismantling these things can be impossible, or this is like I think a direct. That's in direct conflict to that, which I like.
I want to ask about a couple of the other characters, and we don't necessarily have to spend a significant amount of time on it. I realize that we've talked quite a bit just about T'Challa and Killmonger, but we've got other characters that we can discuss as well. And I don't know, did you ever read Black Panther comics, or did you ever read like Captain America or Fantastic Four comics where Black Panther would make appearances?
I didn't read Black Panther comics, but I encountered Black Panther in other titles.
And he's usually, in those other titles, he's usually a quasi-adversary that is able to like single-handedly take down, these superheroes. There are differences between the comics and this new MCU incarnation of the Black Panther characters. And I appreciate many of these differences. One of them specifically is Shuri. Shuri in the comics grew up, his half-sister, if I remember his half-sister, and she wanted to be the female Black Panther. She wanted to be the first female Black Panther. And T'Challa comes and takes the mantle instead. And what's interesting about the movie is she couldn't be further from that, right? She spends the entire movie mocking the traditions of Wakanda. She is incredibly modern, right? She is, and I don't mean modern in the sense of technology and all that. I mean, like, she's
not a traditionalist.
Correct.
She rejects.
She's a progressive thinker.
I think that's an important piece of this, because in a way, and Ryan Coogler acknowledges this, that the monarchy and the traditional aspects of Wakandan power, Wakandan politics, isn't perfect. And I think that she challenges that.
And she becomes Q, right? If Black Panther is Bond, is this country's James Bond, Shuri is Q. She is the smartest person in the room at all times. She is the one who is able to master this ore that is now that has penetrated their country. Another difference is the character of Nakia, played by Lupita Nyong'o, who clearly had a romantic relationship with T'Challa at some point, left the country to be a spy, became a humanitarian. Mm-hmm. You know, she's part of the reason why T'Challa has the change that he does. She's a bit different than the character in the comics. In the comics, she becomes... At one point, she basically becomes a villain, and a lot of that is because she's sort of insanely jealous, and because T'Challa's, romancing other characters. He romances Storm, marries Storm at one point. Nakia's not happy. She becomes Malice, and it's not a very good look for that character. But
wait, she becomes a character called Malice?
Yeah, she's Malice.
Oh, interesting.
So I appreciate that it doesn't seem they're going down that path with this particular character. Yeah, and then I also really appreciate characters like Okoye, who is an insanely strong general of an insanely strong army. Mm-hmm. Not coincidentally, all women. They are the elite, and they are all women. This is a culture that has embraced the power of women. They might have a king, but they know that their strength is in their women. And so that's a wonderful take. I also love, by the way, and they even touched on this in that behind the scenes that you were talking about earlier. They touched on the fact that in the scene where they're there at the sort of the casino bar, mm-hmm. they're there to get the piece of vibranium from Claw, or actually they're trying to bring Claw back to Wakanda due to his war crimes and all that. Okoye is wearing a wig, and otherwise she's bald and has her rank actually tattooed on her head, and They touch on the fact in that round table that in that moment, the moment that she is discovered, and the moment the cover is blown, the first thing to go is the wig. Yeah. She then shows her strength by immediately uncovering her rank and her... I just think that's a wonderful character moment where it's like, oh, I'm not even necessarily going to defend myself first. First thing I'm going to do is remove this thing that isn't me.
And use it as a part of this combat. Like, I remember people screaming in the theater, like, this moment is, it captures so many feelings for us. She's fully embracing her warrior identity. She's literally detaching the aspects of whether it's Americanism or some cultural pieces that are not a part of her culture, that the U.S., well, actually it's South Korea where they are there, where there's this expectation to put on literally diminish or cover parts of her identity. Yeah. And
this is the moment she becomes like fully herself.
Yeah. Well, she's been fully herself, but this is the moment where she doesn't have to, she
cover it up.
Yeah. She was in, this is a bit of espionage. Like she had to be in this disguise. Yeah. But it's a very empowering moment. And I think we feel her become more actualized or more herself as she strips that off. It's a great beat.
I have to admit, I enjoyed this movie significantly more the second time I saw it than the first. The first time I saw it, I was there for not just entertainment value, but the first time you watch a Marvel movie, you're trying to take in the Marvelness of the movie. You're trying to where does this fit in with the rest of the story?
Yeah.
How to blah blah blah, and I did find myself put off by I felt at the time that Black Panther I thought deserved a better, a bigger, better movie, and now as I sit here watching it for the purposes of our show, I realize just how personal the movie is, how intimate the movie is. And so I have a deeper appreciation for what the movie actually achieved than I did the first time I saw it, where I came out of the theater having just watched a really bad visual effects driven movie at times, where it seems like they ran out of time and ran out of money. That train sequence is one of the worst, where the characters are literally just made of CG. Unlike, say, Civil War, where there's a stuntman in a Black Panther suit and doing these dynamic fights and scenes and running up onto the car and grabbing onto the, it's all feels like it's weight. It's there on the screen. There's weight on the screen. And then you watch this and it's just rubber people with no weight whatsoever doing dynamic things that can't be done in this world, in this environment that doesn't exist. And you sit there there was a period of time when I first saw the movie and I'm just kind of like, I am so bored by this action sequence. I want to get back to the other stuff in Wakanda. And I began to almost feel insulted for like Black Panther fans. I'm like, it's like, no, he deserves a better climax than this. And now as I watch the movie, I realize the climax is in the emotional impact at the end. It's not the rubber people flying around and punching each other.
I think you're right. And what I pull from it, for me, is very personal, which is, this character, Killmonger, is at first seemingly adrift and lost and haunted by abandonment and struggling to be kind of in both regions or nations, trying to reconcile the belongingness, but what I'm embracing and what I think a lot of people realize, it's T'Challa that actually makes a significant identity transformation. I'm not the king that sits on the throne, that manages this vibranium, that hoards this material. I'm the humanitarian who sees the pain and trauma that my community is experiencing and has experienced. But going back to Killmonger, he dies, spoiler alert, he dies at the end of the film fully knowing, I'm not lost. I'm not adrift. I'm not fragmented. I'm not between. I'm not like the in-between. I fully know who I am and I fully know what I'm meant to do.
And he's going out on his terms.
He's going, the agency is inspiring. It's sad. There's nothing, super happy about this. It's incredibly tragic, but the concept of his self-actualization being one that means he found a way to build identity and belongingness with what he had, with who he was. His purpose, yes, was politically extreme, and it resulted in some tragic outcomes, his own being one of them. But the sense of denying the idea that, oh, you're the outcast, you don't belong, you're the cousin that we can't claim, whatever, negative things. I think that is kind of what I'm drawn to. Let's get into a more complex identity narrative.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people can embrace that.
Yeah. I gotta be honest, I am terrified to some degree about what this movie the sequel is going to be like, without,
Chadwick Chadwick Boseman.
Without Chadwick Boseman. Here's another thing I have to be honest about, and this obviously wasn't just about this movie, but it would have been pertaining to Civil War. At the time, I was also really upset that I felt like Djimon Hounsou was the quintessential screen adaptation of like a Black Panther, just in age, because they make T'Challa younger in the movie than he is in the comics. I thought, Djimon Hounsou is a fantastic Black Panther, and he voiced Black Panther in the animated comic that Reggie Hudlin wrote, and they had it animated. And I felt bad because Djimon Hounsou ultimately ends up being just sort of a toss-away character in Guardians of the Galaxy, and I feel like he was robbed of a prime opportunity to play this amazing character of Black Panther. But now you watch Chadwick Boseman and you go, I can't imagine anyone playing Black Panther other than Chadwick Boseman. He just embodies that character so much. He does so much with his eyes, and he's got such sort of empathy, just radiating from him, whereas I think Djimon Hounsou radiates like strength. Like he would have been the perfect strong Black Panther. This is the perfect empathetic Black Panther, and I have no idea what they're going to do. And I think that there's a deep part of me that regrets this, but I agree with a lot of the other people that out in the world that you kind of just have to recast him. You got to find T'Challa has more story to tell. You can't let this be it for him, and you definitely can't give it to Shuri now. Like in the comics, Shuri ends up becoming.
Yeah, why can't you give it to her? Well, because she's not gonna. She wouldn't. Maybe the story would be the tension, the struggle of wanting, of recognizing she would be next in line, but her not wanting to take on.
I think ultimately you can't give it to her at the moment because of
she signed on to something.
The actress is problematic right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's some unfortunate stuff going on with her in the news.
Good grief. Okay.
So,
but I agree with you. I think much like the comics, and much like other franchises that have had to do this. I mean, Marvel has had to do this before. Recasting isn't impossible, and I think it's worthwhile if it will lead to more stories about the Wakandan culture and Black Panther.
So, Drea, why don't you tell folks where they can find you online?
They can find me on my website, drdreapsychology.com, or in the social media platforms as Arkham Asylum Doc.
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at bward028. On Instagram at b_ward028. You can find us both on Twitter at Arkham Sessions and on Instagram at the Arkham Sessions. Email us at arkhamsessions@gmail.com. You can come find us on Facebook. Come join us on Patreon. We've got a couple of folks that need to be called out because they have gotten our annual membership where they paid $30 or more, and now they are getting coins. One of those folks is Swara Salih, and the other folk does not actually want to be called out. He has earned that right, and we totally respect it, but I want you to know that we see you, we thank you, and your coin is also in the mail. You can get your coin by joining our annual membership. All you got to do is pay $30 or more, and you get a one of the last challenge coins from 2020. And the more we get through 2022, the more I think we're going to end up designing one for this year as well, because I think this year will also require a challenge coin.
Lastly, if folks have questions they would like us to address on our panel at WonderCon all about the Batman movie by Matt Reeves, send them our way. You can email us at
arkhamsessions@gmail.com or hit us up on our various socials. But yes, we want to hear your questions so that we're not just all talking about what we want to talk about. We want to talk about what you want to talk about as well. So hit us up. And of course, follow our family over at Fanbase Press. Till next time, when we cover, can you believe this, Drea? Infinity War.
No, I'm not ready.
Infinity
I
War.
cannot believe I am so unready.
It
I'm
is
baffled.
so weird.
How is it time for us to cover Infinity War? Are we going to do a two-parter, or are we going to?
No.
Yikes!
It already is a two-parter. So no, we are going to cover Infinity War Crazy Pants. That is coming up next time. Till
if
then,
only there was a crisis that lasted several years, that decimated a huge part of our global population, created trauma
Right.
and loss. I wonder
anything that we could relate to.
I wonder.
Till next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
The Arkham Sessions.
This corset is really uncomfortable. So could we all just wrap it up and go home?